In every democracy, journalism, particularly newspapers, have played a critical role in the freedom we so enjoy. These days, there's a lot of talk about the future of newspapers. Atlanta's own Ted Turner predicted our demise, saying newspapers would die, quote, shortly. Oh wait, he said that in 1981. But clearly, the world is changing for newspapers and journalism. It was in 1993 when I first realized that we were heading into uncharted waters. My then 2-year-old climbed into my lap and started tapping away at a children's computer game. She learned how to use a computer before she learned how to read. Her mind and her mindset was going to be different. There are two distinct questions here. One, what do newspapers look like for future generations? And two, what does journalism look like? Those questions often get muddled because newspapers have provided the bulk of serious journalism for hundreds of years. Technology in this past century created radio and TV, but neither medium puts the resources into journalism that newspapers do. They are two very different issues. With new media, the internet and beyond, that's becoming increasingly apparent. Let me talk about newspapers first. There are a million reasons why Ted Turner's prediction in 1981 that newspapers would die shortly should have been accurate. We were on the verge of the information age explosion. Think about what it takes to make a newspaper. Chop down a tree, turn the tree into very thin, very special paper, run the paper through giant, expensive presses, then send a legion of folks to throw those papers on millions of dryways 365 days a year. There has to be a better way to distribute written information to people. Enter the internet. But still, millions of people, Americans, buy and read a newspaper every day. So why is that? Because a newspaper is a wonderful thing. It's portable, it's easy to browse, it has a mix of fun and serious, it's helpful, it's educational, it's enjoyable. When our most loyal readers talk about the AJC, they talk about it with emotion. It's an important ritual for them every day. There are a million reasons not to read a newspaper anymore, but people keep doing it. For those people who love to read, who are deeply connected to community, and in some cases have a lifelong ritual of reading a newspaper, there is no replacement. A million reasons to switch isn't enough for them. But for younger American readers, that equation changes. Everyone has their list of why young people don't read newspapers, and here's mine. They don't have that lifetime ritual. They grew up with comfort and ease with the internet. They're used to everything instantly. A newspaper with a 12-hour-old news is alien. They are connected to communities, but not necessarily geographic. They are able to connect with like-minded people around the world and do that. Will they discover newspapers later in life? For the vast majority, it's doubtful. Even in my own family, where I've used every threat and bribe in the book, I'm only at 50% success rate right now. Newspapers will change. The economic realities will force that. The fundamental business model is changing. Newspapers will become smaller. They will focus their missions more tightly. And the successful ones will offer quality content that satisfies their readers but does not overwhelm them. But some will not survive, and communities will suffer because of the loss. For many years, many American newspapers saw the web as their salvation. Revenue wasn't huge, but it continued to grow at double-digit rates. The online operation of newspapers became profitable businesses. But a year or two ago, that changed. Google and the other portals grabbed a larger and larger share of the ad dollars. Ad networks were created, bringing down the price we could charge for digital ads. All of a sudden, we started seeing declines in digital revenue. Right now, the newspaper industry is seriously rethinking how it distributes content digitally. Rupert Murdoch, who owns the Wall Street Journal, accused Google of, quote, stealing his content. One of his associates described Google as digital vampires. The Associate Press has hired lawyers to go after companies that take large chunks of newspaper content, repackage it, and sell it without ever asking. Years ago, the Wall Street Journal was one of the few newspapers that didn't offer their content for free digitally. Now most newspapers are reevaluating. I'm not sure exactly how this will turn out, but expect some major changes in this area in the next 2 years. So that's the status of the industry. The future of journalism is a different and high-stakes question. It goes to the underpinnings of our democracy. So what is journalism today? It is about looking at the world through a clear lens, asking those basic questions: who, what, why, when, how, and then answering those questions for readers. It is about asking those questions without bias or point of view. It is about answering those questions with truth, accuracy, and intellectual honesty, not with marketing slogans. Years ago, I visited Cuba with a group from the American Society of Newspaper Editors. One of the most dramatic sessions was a meeting with Cuban editors. They worked for the government. They report the news through that prism and were unapologetic about it. In this country, we can find examples where that definition becomes blurred. People jump back and forth from government to media. Radio and web and some parts of cable TV are filled with people talking and writing about news through their prism and their prism alone. But just because you're in the media doesn't mean you're practicing journalism. There's a lot of conversation now about the values of journalism. For decades, journalism, and it can be expensive, has been funded by a newspaper business model that, until recently, was very lucrative. Now there is a lot of discussion about how journalism will be funded in the future. Even Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, talked about it recently, saying, "Well-funded, targeted, professionally managed investigative journalism is a necessary precondition, in my view, to a functioning democracy." And so that's what we worry about. And as you know, that was always subsidized in the newspaper model by other things they did. You know, the story about the scandal in Iraq or Afghanistan was difficult to advertise against, but there was enough revenue that allowed the newspaper to fulfill its mission. Some talk about nonprofits helping support that content. Some have suggested government should help fund this kind of work. I can't imagine that working. Sounds a little like Cuba to me. Seems to me that society and its citizens need to better understand the value of journalism. For decades, newspapers have been incredibly cheap, funded by an advertising model that was very effective. Think about the cup of coffee that millions buy every day at designer coffee shops. A newspaper costs half that, and we bring it to your home. Just think of what you wouldn't know if it wasn't for the AJC. We uncovered test score improvements in schools that just didn't make sense. There was a reason. Teachers were cheating. We just completed a 7-part series looking at the huge issues facing the next mayor of Atlanta. We're in the middle of a poignant series about a high school football coach battling Lou Gehrig's disease and teaching his team values. And we continue to dig away at very questionable land purchases by Gwinnett County. All of this takes time, and we are fortunate to have a newsroom of about 100 reporters focused on local issues. Because of the financial challenges, we have made choices, and our choice has been to invest in unique local reporting. That's where we can offer material people can't get elsewhere. We now have more investigative reporters than ever before, and we are focusing hard on mining key beats for news. We are also looking at different ways to tell news, using photos, videos, databases, giving more power to the work. I believe that things that have value survive and are made stronger through transformational change. And I believe passionately in the value of what we do. You know, you often get what you pay for. Quality journalism is expensive. This country has been fortunate that there has been a business model based on advertising that paid for that for many decades. As that comes under increasing strain, this raises serious questions for all of us. Let me leave asking you these questions. How will you get the information you need as citizens to make the right decisions? How will you get the information you need as business people to make the right decisions? How will you know what is truth in a world of conflicting information provided by unknown sources? All of us, journalists and non-journalists, need to believe in and support the principles of journalism. Believe in the importance of objective truth, validation, balance, and critical thought. If not, all of us will suffer. Thank you. I think that some of it is getting people comfortable with paying for content. I mean, I recently converted to an iPhone, and it is life-changing. Now, this is my ad for the iPhone, but you know, but I don't, you know, so I'm set up on iTunes, and I don't think anything if somebody says, oh, here's the, you know, you really need to buy this app, you know, click, you know, and all of a sudden my credit card's charged. I mean, I think that, and that's when I talk about that things are going to change a lot in the next 2 years, I think that there's going to be some acceptance of it. Now, the problem is, the money to be made may not be as great as the money was in the past. I mean, the reality is, I once had a newsroom of 535. It's now down to 225. I don't think there's ever going to be enough of a business model to take it back to 225. But can we do really great work with 225? Absolutely. Good. I think a really long time, because I think that there are enough people that like the experience of a newspaper. I mean, I think it's almost as much a demographic question as anything, that people who are in their 40s, 50s, there's nothing yet technologically that competes. Now, I guess that could change tomorrow. There could be some tablet or something that comes out that you say, oh, this is as good. But, even though I love my iPhone and, I'm an avid web user, it's, as you know, it's not the same. And so I think newspapers have a long life. I mean, it's interesting that Murdoch has invested so heavily in the Wall Street Journal and has put in a lot of money into it, and I think he believes that, they will change, but I think they'll be around quite a while. Yeah. I think you're going to find in the next few years a lot more paywalls put up and sort of variations of that. The Wall Street Journal, obviously, now if you can't read the Wall Street Journal without paying for it, I think you will see a lot more of that. I mean, so that it will sort of change people's habits in some way, and then you'll make a decision. Do I want to, buy it digitally? Do I want to get it in print? But it's not just sort of there digitally for free. So I think that will change a lot. I also think that if you look at the digital audience, it is different than the print audience. So if we look at, how do we get to 1 billion page views? We got to 1 billion page views by breaking news, sports, and opinion. In print, it's a lot sort of broader range of information that's needed. And so I think there are sort of slightly different audiences and needs. Yeah. Yeah. The interesting thing is a lot of the foreign press is just now being hit by sort of some of these technology challenges. And so, let's see, last year I was asked to go speak to the Canadian Newspapers Association, and basically their view was, it hasn't hit us yet, but we know it's coming, so what can we learn from you all? And we had a group in from Russia the other day, and this guy who owns the TV station and the newspaper in Siberia was talking about his challenges and how the internet was sort of changing his business, which I wasn't quite prepared for, but it's really interesting. What's happened globally is there's actually been some resurgence in print in sort of tabloid market print publications, particularly in Latin America. There's been some real growth, but I think a lot of the world hasn't yet sort of felt the technology changes. I mean, one of the biggest changes is really in places where there hasn't been a free press, that all of a sudden there's websites that are created by people who are able to sort of get their story across in different ways. And so, I spent some time recently with a guy from Kosovo who is basically doing investigative reporting on a website as a way to get information out. I think that's probably one of the biggest trends worldwide right now. Yeah. I guess your version of what happened then is a little different than mine. I mean, I remember Jay Bookman writing column after column questioning it. I think there are really two pieces. One is, what is the information that's available? And I think in some cases, and I think this is a big issue in this state and a big issue in nationally, that the journalism community has been very concerned about is, the basic laws are in place for freedom of information, but the way you actually get that information is often, there's story after story about freedom of information requests that are 5 years old sitting there unanswered. I mean, we, just locally, I mean, we have fight after fight over, I mean, I was on the phone with lawyers yesterday because when the Speaker of the House committed suicide, basically you tried to, thank you, correct, thank you, attempted a suicide. No, thank you, ordinarily you call the police station and here's the police report and here's the 911 tape. It took us 4 days to get that and a call from a lawyer. And so I think it's it's two things. One is it is a government that provides information and is open about it and believes in that, and then it's us sort of spending the time to do it. And I think part of it goes to having the resources to do it. So if you think about the investigation we just did on the CRCT scores and how they just didn't make any sense. That was months of work of, regression analysis and saying to people, can this be right? Because you don't want to, you don't want to say something that's not true. So I think that for us, it's sort of that balance. I mean, obviously, we don't find out everything, when we'd like to or when we need to, but I think that there are a lot of committed people working to sort of find that out. And as you know, in the Iraq story, I mean, there were reporters digging away for years afterwards, and that's how it finally came out. So, well, what's nice is, I think, what's true about Jay and Cynthia and Kyle, who are full-time columnists now, is they spend the time on reporting. All three of them are not just sort of, sitting around saying, let me think about how I feel about this issue, but they're doing the reporting, and that makes a big difference. They won't like it, will they? I think the question is, can you sort of figure out what makes sense that you still have a business model that you would offer for free? Sort of breaking news. Are there certain pieces of it that you say, this is going to drive page views, and we have some advertising that supports it, and we're going to have that as free, and we're going to have other pieces where you have to pay. I mean, think about music where, for a while everybody was taking music for free, but iTunes is pretty much an established part of how we get music now. And so I think there will clearly be a transition. And I use the word paywall, but I'm not sure that's probably the best word. It's almost, I think there will end up being some variation, and I think there'll be a lot of experimenting in the next few years. More of a screen porch or something than an actual wall. I think we'll have to see, but there's a lot of work going on this question right now. So I became editor in 2002. And I thought, and I'd been managing editor for years at various papers, and I thought, well, this won't be that different. It's still, putting out a newspaper and doing that. And I would say the first few years I was editor, I was very heavily focused on content questions. As time has gone on, I've found the need to get increasingly focused in, helping figure out how do we, what's the business model going to be? So to that question. So as we talk about, well, if we put some content that was only available for print subscribers, and we charged for other, and we had a free website, what would that look like? I need to be integrally involved. And so it's changed over time, and I'm very thankful that my minor was econ now in college. So, yes. No, those were, as we've shrunk, that was one of the decisions that we made. We have one reporter in Washington who's heavily focused on the delegation. Cynthia Tucker's moved to Washington, feeling like that was such an important part of the story, and we wanted her there during this administration. But other than that, we're relying on wire services now. And that's as when I talk about choices, we've had to make a lot of choices as we've shrunk. And so we've cut production staff a fair amount. We've cut managing, and we've cut sort of non-local news, because I really felt like that's, what we have that has value is that unique local content. And so the more local news reporters I can have, the better. And so, I'm not sure the actual local news staff has really shrunk that much over the years. It's been everything around it.
So in your
Circuit. I'm not going to remember those numbers. Here's what I do know. Circulation is down in the 20 counties is where we really see where we are. So when we look at sort of the numbers, we're looking at 20 county. It's down. But the interesting thing is readership isn't. And so we think that's a couple things. One is, people are sharing more, in these economic times. And some of it is obviously, I think there's a lot more sort of, let me go to the coffee shop, look at the paper, read ajc.com, and there's just sort of an interesting sort of way of getting information that's different than it used to be. So I think that's part of it. We also, I think, had a very difficult year. We started the year with a new publisher who came in and said, you lost money last year, you lost a lot of money last year, and we need to cut costs and get profitable. And so we spent a lot of time this year getting costs to a place where we can be profitable again, and we will be profitable next year. But in the process, you're still cleaning up from behind, going, we stopped selling papers for several months. We need to start doing that again. So we've got some work to do to reclaim some of that circulation. I think we will. We actually, we've really been focusing on this, and for the past 3 weeks, we've sold more papers than we lost, and that's been the first time that's happened probably in a year. So that's good. It'll be bad on my pocketbook. I think it's tough leaving downtown because it's been sort of a place where we've been forever, and it sort of has a lot of historic, connection for us. And on a personal note, we do have a lot of staffers who it really sort of changes their commute in ways that are good or bad, and probably for most people bad because they thought they were going to be downtown. On the other hand, it will be nice to be in a facility that's really sized for us, and we get to sort of build it as we'd like it. And so, I think it's a sort of an up and down version. We'll see. What's interesting is obviously there's a niche, for people, for biased news, and there are people who've made very successful businesses out of that. What's interesting is it's something that we probed a lot in some research we did about a year ago, and we didn't find that. We found the vast majority of people want us to tell them the truth. They want, so they talk about on the opinion page, I'm okay if Cynthia Tucker's there, but I want somebody who has a different point of view. And so I want balance, but I'm okay with that. Now, that's not everybody, but we found that in this market anyway, that the bulk of people were very comfortable with balance. There are people on either side who are less so. But it's a good question. Great.
I think thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming here.